Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we are going to talk about one of the most underutilized features of the M365 suite, something called Secure Score. And I think this is a very valuable tool for any security defender to go through and familiarize yourself with it, because it can bring a lot of value to your organization. When you talk about Microsoft Secure Score, there's actually 3 secure scores in general. The one we're going to focus on today is associated with M365, which will have things from the Defender suites as well as configuration from Windows and applications. There's also a secure score specific to compliance, which is in the compliance portal. And then there's also a very similar secure score for your cloud security posture management, which is associated with Defender for Cloud. Now, a lot of the things that we talk about are going to apply as far as conceptually to the compliance and the Defender for Cloud. But again, we're going to focus specifically on the M365 because, number one, I think it's the most common. And number two, if you're a Microsoft customer, you're going to have this. You may not all have the compliance portal and the Defender for Cloud apps if you're not licensed for it. But if you're an O365 customer, you're going to have Secure Score for M365. The roles required for the Secure Score in the security.microsoft.com portal, you're going to need to either be a global administrator, a security administrator, an Exchange administrator, or SharePoint administrator in order to read or write to the secure scores. And that means that when you're seeing the different actions, being able to change the status or take notes within those particular actions. Now, those roles are very high roles. So understand that, Exchange administrator is probably the second most powerful role in the organization. Global admin obviously is the most powerful. Security admin is very powerful as well. SharePoint administrator, right? Those are like very powerful roles. So this does take some administrative roles to read and write. Now, if you're just reading the secure scores in order to access them, the roles are much less, like help desk administrator, user administrator, which most service level desks will have access to, security reader, security operator, global reader, service support administrator. So those are a little bit less, not to say that they aren't powerful, because help desk administrator has the ability to reset passwords. So still administrative roles, but not as high. And this is for read-only access. So the reason why I wanted to talk about Secure Score was among the technical specialists that I work with, my team this week, someone was mentioning something about Secure Score and some organizations asking about it. And I realized that we never had a conversation about it. And I think people underutilize it for a lot of different reasons. Number one, they may not know about it, or they may not know what value it brings. If they do know about it and they go and check it, I think they may be overwhelmed by the number of tasks that are there, which then, they don't know where to start, because it's just, there's so many things, and how do you know which ones to do? And even if you wanted to, no one really owns it. So I think a lot of times what happens is you start on it and then something else comes up, another project or another ask or some fire that you need to put out, and then you don't go back to it, and no one follows up, no one asks about it, because it's not a program, it's not operationalized. It's just there, and no person has been assigned to own that particular thing. I also think some organizations don't see value in it because they don't understand the percentage or the scores, or they're using third-party solutions and they're like, oh, that's Microsoft. Like, it doesn't matter for me. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of talk about each one of these reasons why organizations don't use it and try to dispel some of those myths and give you some more information so that hopefully you can start utilizing it. So the first one is you don't know about it or you don't know that it exists. So first you go to security.microsoft.com, and at the home page, there's a section that gives you an overview, and that will have your secure score there. And you can click the link to go to the section. And also on the navigation side on the left hand, there's also a tab for secure score. So you can click on that. When you do, you get an overview. Now, a lot of people get wrapped up with this percentage, right? Because I went to my demo tenant, I looked at it, and if you go and look at yours, maybe the percentage says like 40% or 50%. And you're like, well, that means I'm not very secure. That's not true, right? Like, you need to understand that security is not 100%, and 100% on this secure score shouldn't be the goal. You should make incremental changes and then try to figure out where you want to be, how much risk you want to take, because no organization is going to be 100%. I don't even think anyone's in the 90s, really. So don't get wrapped up by that percentage. Also, more actions and detection items are added all the time. So maybe like you check in December and it was at 60%, and now you're checking and you're at 40%. And you're like, I haven't done anything. All of a sudden I've gone down. Well, that's just because there's more configurations, things that have come out over time that are added to it, and then your score drops down because you haven't implemented those new things. There's also a nice little area in that secure score to compare your organization to organizations of similar size, so you can see roughly where others are compared to your organization. And that can give you an idea of where you might want to be roughly.
It's an easy thing to not know about, even though it's kind of right there when you go to the security center, just because it's not a product that's for sale. It's built into the platform, and there's no licensing requirement and no cost to it. So there's nobody kind of like incented to drive activity to it. It's there as a tool for your use. And I think positioning that up front can help address some of these other potential objections as well. Like, we're mostly third party. We don't use Microsoft. Like, this is no value to us. That's not the intent, is to use this as like a sales tool to make you turn on all the Microsoft stuff. It really is to help give you a comparable baseline or benchmark that you can use to measure yourself against other orgs, or better yet, measure against yourself from yesterday and a month ago and a year ago. Because there is that opportunity to measure your secure score over time. And to Andy's point, the goal isn't 100%. The goal is continuous improvement. And I think there's a lot of ways we can help our listeners get there as we go through the discussion today.
So another thing that I think orgs struggle with is just the sheer number of action items or recommended actions, and they're not sure where to start. So when you go to recommended actions within the secure score, it automatically filters it and orders it by the score impact, which means that if I take care of this action item, how much my score will increase. And you get partial credit too. So if there's a certain recommended action that you're implementing for a percentage of people, or if there's multiple steps, you're going to get partial credit to increase that score. So it almost gamifies the whole, increasing security by picking which ones will increase your score by. So that's one way to take a look and try to prioritize your time, is just based on which one has the most impact to the score, which usually is based on how insecure that configuration is or how many users are impacted by it. There's a formula that's calculated. So that's one way. Just let Microsoft tell you which one is going to give you the biggest score impact, which will probably be the one that will be the most substantial security increase. You can also filter by products. So This may happen if your team doesn't take care of the endpoint configuration, or your team doesn't take care of identity, or it's something else. So you could filter by Azure AD. You can filter it by Defender for Endpoint. You can filter it by devices. You can even filter it with third-party apps, because app governance, which by the way is now included with Defender for Cloud Apps. It used to be an add-on, but now it's included with Defender for Cloud Apps. That will include app configurations for third-party apps like Okta and Salesforce and ServiceNow. And so these can show up if there's a specific team that configures those applications. And one example is, and I'm just pulling this out of the top of my head, but let's say like in Salesforce, you have 50 administrators, right? I'm hoping, I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that one of the alerts that might come up to say, hey, in Salesforce, you have too many administrators, please reduce that. Something like that. That's kind of a basic example. And maybe you're not a Salesforce administrator, so that's something that you could filter it by and pass it off to the Salesforce team. I'm going to take one example now. When you go into the action, the recommended action, when you click on it, it gives you a whole lot of information on that action. So in my demo tenant, the first one that pops up that gives me the biggest score impact is turn on safe attachments in block mode. So this is a Defender for Office configuration. On the General tab, it gave me a description, and this is for all of your actions. It'll give you a description on what it is and why it needs to be turned on or should be turned on. So it says safe attachments in block mode prevents messages with detected malware attachments from being delivered. These messages are quarantined, and only admins, not regular users, can review, release, or delete them. This will also automatically block future malware attachments. Sounds great, right? So it gives me a reason why this is a good thing to turn it on. And it gives me a status. So it says 14.29% of your users are affected by policies that are configured less securely than the recommended. And then it says 85% of my users aren't affected by policies set for the following domain. So in general, this policy is basically 100% not being used for my users. They're either in a less secure than recommended, or it's not being affected by policy at all. So that's good to know. And then it also can give you a history of any events or alerts that have been triggered because of this secure information. So like if, for example, there was something that wasn't caught because I didn't have this in block mode. On the implementation tab, it gives you the licensing prereqs and if you meet them. So I was licensed for Defender for Office P2, and it says, hey, you're good to go. And then there's a link to the documentation if you want to read about how to implement it. But also at the bottom, there's a manage button. And this is for every action that is recommended. You click on it and it takes you, if it can, to the area, if you have permission to edit or add that policy that they're talking about. So it's all right there for you. You can look at the documentation, read about it. You can click the manage button. It'll take you right there. There's also a share button. If like you see this and you need to send it to the right person, there's a link or email or Teams or Planner that you can add to a MS Planner. And then finally, when you're ready to kind of close it out or take care of the action, there's an edit status and action button. And in there, you can say, I'm going to plan on doing this at some point, or you can accept the risk. You could even say resolved through a third party. If like, let's say, for example, one of the big ones for identity is implement MFA. And this will pop up if you're not using the Microsoft Authenticator or conditional access for MFA or security baselines or something like that. Let's say you're an Okta customer. Well, it's going to pop up and say you need to implement MFA. And you're going to tell your boss, and your boss is going to be like, well, we use Okta for MFA. We do it all the time. So you can just say resolved through third party, and that will take it off and give you the score for that.
So you just went through a whole lot, Andy. I think this is a lot of what we're going to talk about. I mean, throughout today's show. And it's really helpful as a good place to start because you do see the items that are most impactful. And you can filter them or sort them by maybe products you have access to or your team manages or what you own. So you can find a place to start and start chipping away and making a difference right then and there. And I appreciate all the information this shares as far as how many users this is going to impact and what do you need to do and why is this a helpful mitigation. And then that's really cool. I didn't even realize it did deep link you right to the admin console of whatever it is so that you can enable it when possible. And then I also notice in the edit status and action plan here, the completed radio button is grayed out. And the reason why that is because this is one of the detections that can function natively. It can just go read, does Andy now have this configured in this way? Yes. Okay. Completed. Check it off. And really there's, again, our show is vendor neutral, even though we are both employed by Microsoft. We try to keep the show separate from work, but this is where you do see some of the benefits of that platform approach, where you now have a platform that can not only kind of give you a readout of current status across multiple security domains, but give you guidance to improve your security posture across multiple security domains. And when you take those changes, as much as is possible, automatically update to reflect them. And again, if you're not using Microsoft for that solution, maybe in this case, the one Andy just went through, this is essentially a secure email gateway function. So if you're a Proofpoint, Mimecast, Cisco customer, you could certainly hit the radio button for resolve through third party, and you would still get credit for it. So we're going to touch on this later that, there may be a perception there isn't value here because we're not all in on the Microsoft security platform. And this is an example of here's the benefit of if you are, but here's how you can still do it and get value from it, even if you're not. And so I think this is just really, really helpful on how it walks through. And again, like any major project, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Same thing here. Like, how do you improve your security score? One step at a time. So just find some things you can start to chip away at and start to make a plan to implement them and go through proper change control, please, as you do it. But there's certainly, there's plenty of opportunity to go through.
Yeah, definitely don't go with the let's push this button or change this thing and see who screams. Unless you're sometimes at a very, very small organization. So,
hey, before you go on, there's one more thing. I remembered it now just at the very end. So you mentioned there's a share button to send it in a link or an email, Teams, or a planner. So let me dovetail nicely into our next section about no one owns it before we get there. And I'm going to go on a slight tangent, but then we're going to pull it together. So in Microsoft 365, there's a message center. And in the message center, sometimes things are just informational, but sometimes there are messages that are planned for change. Something's going to change. For example, on May 8th, which will probably be the day you're hearing this episode, Microsoft is going to start enforcing number matching for multi-factor authentication in Azure Active Directory. And that was communicated through your Microsoft 365 Message Center a long time ago, because initially we planned to make this change sooner. And then through customer feedback, realized we should allow a little extra time. If you were blindsided by that, that means you're not managing and operationalizing your message center, which you should do. And the best way to do that, and we can put this link in the show notes, is there's integration between the message center and planner. And what that does is automatically take every single message that comes in the message center and creates a task in planner for it. And then someone who's designated as, say, the M365 system owner, service owner, can go through and assign each one of those messages to a responsible party, either for informational purposes or because they need to take some action to prepare. In the case of this number matching change that goes into effect on May 8th, the guidance from Microsoft has been, you're going to have a better experience if you implement this on your own, because when we start to roll it out, you will see enforcement ramp up over the course of the day, which could mean you have inconsistent enforcement on day one. So you're better off enforcing this change yourself and your tenants sooner. That would be a great thing to get that message in the message center, assign it to your identity owner, and have that identity person be able to make a plan to implement that change sooner. So again, you're not blindsided by it or not taken by surprise by it. And I love the use of Planner for that. This is great integration, and it's something you need to operationalize if you're an M365 customer so that you are proactively understanding new information that comes in and change that you need to prepare for. And Planner is a great tool to do that. And so here is in SecureScore, the same way you can share actions you need to take through Planner and use that as kind of a task management solution to ensure that your peer administrators are able to make changes they need to make in their domain or other practice. So that, I hope, is a nice little segue, Andy, to kind of the potential objection and how we're going to handle that, saying, well, no one owns SecureScore. No one owns it.
Yeah, it's very similar to how a lot of people don't know about it. If they do know about it, it's not a priority, or no one owns it and no one's checking it, or no one follows up on it, right? So, for example, at some companies, maybe, someone hears about it and they go and check it and they see the task and like, yeah, we should start working on it. And then it just kind of falls off because something else comes up and there's nothing to continually operationalize it into your culture. So SecureScore should be treated like a program, a security program, very similar to like a vulnerability, application vulnerability, or a vulnerability management program. It's ongoing. You're always going to have something to fix. It's not a project where you deploy it and then you're done. So there's going to be a link that I'm going to put in the show notes that was written by the team who rolled it out initially 3 years ago now in preview on how to operationalize it. There's a lot of really good information within that article. But one of the things that it talks about is identify your stakeholders, because SecureScore undoubtedly will involve multiple teams, multiple different type of administrators, leadership, analysts, so make sure that you're involving them. They understand why you're doing it, what the impact is, and what the time commitment might be for some of the things that are involved. And like Adam mentioned previously, change management. If you have a change management program, which hopefully you do, this should go on there as an item. Everything that you're changing, a couple things every month or whatever your cadence is, that should be part of that change management program. You want to establish some sort of long-term ownership. Most likely the SecureScore will be managed by the security team, but there should be someone on the security team to ensure like things are still rolling along. So establish some sort of meeting, maybe monthly or bi-monthly. And it doesn't have to be very long. Just say, here are the things that, this is where we were. This is where we want to be. These are the things that we're working on. And I wouldn't even be discouraged if like you came to the meeting and like your score didn't move or your score went down. It's like, yeah, but we're still trying to operationalize it, right? Like, don't get discouraged if the score didn't move, you didn't get anything done, just continue progress, take notes, and there's history and metrics and trend. Adam talked about looking back and seeing where you were like, a year ago or something like that. So you can take a look at your metrics and how you're trending, and then even actions you've taken within SecureScore, it'll have the history of it all there. So make sure that you have someone in charge of doing this and have a cadence around meeting on it.
At Apple, they have this concept of DRI, or directly responsible individual. I like assigning a task like this to a person as opposed to a team, because then you run into our old friend diffusion of responsibility. And that is not conducive to getting things done. So certainly for our listeners, why not raise your hand and say, I'll own this. I'll be the SecureScore owner. I want to stand up a monthly cadence to discuss what we're going to change this month. And I'm going to take responsibility for that, because when this isn't operationalized, Andy, in my experience, and I'd be curious to get your feedback as well, Usually this gets looked at when it's not operationalized as a fire drill. And it's usually CISO's presenting to the board. They need metrics. Give us something so that he can throw some numbers out to them. And I've been in this business long enough, Andy, I'm sure you have too, where it's like, how many emails did we block last month? And how many threats did we mitigate in this? Because they just want to show up and demonstrate value. And they do that through, amongst other things, dropping a lot of big numbers. And so this is the one time it gets looked at maybe every quarterly or annually when someone in leadership starts asking questions. And so, hey, again, what a way to advance your career if you're able to say, no, we manage this on a monthly basis. We're constantly improving. I have those metrics right here, and I would be happy to share them with you, Mr. or Mrs. CISO, or their executive admin or whatever. What a great way to earn visibility and credibility in your organization as someone who's taking ownership of being able to demonstrate improvement over time, because there's not a lot of things in security where you can point to an exact benchmark metric and say, I made that metric better, right? A lot of it is kind of fuzzy where we block this many emails. But okay, what does that really mean? We block this many threats and endpoints. What's that really mean? There are, of course, metrics we can have like, productivity metrics or maybe reduced calls to the help desk or whatever. But it's definitely one of them where you can point to and show meaningful improvement over time. So I'd encourage anyone, raise your hand, pick up a shovel and take ownership of this. This will give you visibility across security domains, across IT practices, and it will make you valuable to leadership as they want to report on the progress of the security program to either the C-suite or to the board of directors. What a fantastic thing to be involved with. So definitely there should be an owner, and why can't that owner be you?
Great advice, and I love the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, I think when you talk about metrics, a lot of organizations are fearful to use Secure Score as a metric because the percentage is misunderstood. It's a low percentage, right? Like I looked at my Secure Score in my demo tenant, and it was 54%. But compared to other organizations of similar size, their scores were 48%. So I was comparably better, and I had several things that I could still improve on. But I think reporting that metric, especially let's say at a board meeting where you only get like 2 to 3 minutes, maybe tops, right? Mm-hmm. With non-technical people, and you toss out a 54%, they're going to, balk at that.
Maybe skip the percent. Say we scored a 54 and, our industry peers or orgs of like size got a 40.
Yeah.
Just skip the percent part.
Yeah, you could do that. There's ways to scope it. Like say you improved, 1% on 50%, right? And which is actually better than if you were to say like I improved 1% out of 100%. So, to find your own way of like reporting on it, but understand that no one is 100%. I honestly think if you're in the 70s, you're probably doing really, really well. If you're operationalizing this and really diligent over a few years, in the 70s, I think is the highest I've ever seen in an organization. So if you want to take that back and like compare, see where you're at. So,
well, and you bring up a good point, and not to go on another tangent, but if you're struggling with this concept, it may be valuable to go do a little bit of research in the concept of assessment. And the very, very short version is assessment is not valuable if everyone tops out the assessment. So if I'm a teacher and I deliver an assessment to 30 students and 15 of them get a perfect score, I don't have a way to differentiate which of those 15 students is stronger than the other. I see them as all equal, but in likelihood, there is still a hierarchy amongst those 15 students that all scored perfect, amongst some that have a better mastery of the material than others. And so in reality, like in the educational space, I'm better off delivering an assessment that no one gets a perfect score on. My intent is not to be difficult for difficulty's sake. It's so that I can create an actual comparison and nobody goes off the charts, because now I can't compare. Now, instead of all those 15 students getting 100%, I can learn this student got a 97 and this student got a 92 and this one got an 89. They all did extremely well on a hard assessment, but now I can compare and know this student has the highest mastery of the material. And so that same thing, like if secure score, if everyone could get to 100%, that's ridiculous. Like we know as security professionals, like there is no 100%. Like that's the worst thing that could happen to you is think like, oh, you know, mission accomplished. Like guys, we can all go home, guys and gals, you know, we've solved security. And we've certainly seen, I will tell you from my experience in this industry, the organizations that exude the most confidence, as opposed to that growth mindset of like, we still have more to do, you know, we're nowhere near there. They're the ones that fall the hardest. And I have certainly walked into customer meetings where they basically told me they had it all figured out and they don't need any help and they're in a great place. And that to me is like the biggest red flag in InfoSec. If you think you've got it all figured out, then you're set up to fail. So I almost like how humble it keeps you, that you're doing great. If you're at, like Andy said, 70 is the highest he's ever seen. If you're in the 50s or 60s, you're doing great. That still means there's more work to do. I think I like where that mentally puts you. But I agree with your point, Andy, like delivering that to a non-practitioner sitting on a board of directors might be a difficult message to land. So you may want to find other ways of making sure that comparable is meaningful to them. But I from my perspective on why it's designed that way, why the scale is that way, I hope that's a little context on the why. Because if everyone could top this out, then it wouldn't be a meaningful tool. So no one can top it out. And that makes it much more meaningful. And that communicates that there's always more to do, because there is always more to do.
What a great way to scope it as far as like an education goes. Cause it reminds me, speaking of tangents, it reminds me of one of the classes that I was in college in engineering, where the professor, super smart guy, got like a PhD in electrical engineering from like Harvard or something like that. And he gave us an exam, and it was one of the hardest exams I've ever taken in my entire life. And I scored like a 50% on it. And when I went to him and said, hey, I'm thinking about, you know, dropping this class because I failed. He's like, what do you mean you failed? I'm like, well, I got a 50% on your exam. He's like, that's great. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I'm not testing you on what you know. I'm testing you on, you know, how to apply and, you know, think about theoretically, you know, how to apply that knowledge. And he said, most people in the class got around a 50. So I was like, oh, okay. That sounds good to me. So yeah, I mean, 50% can be good.
Those engineering schools, which we both went to engineering schools, you at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and me at Iowa State University, definitely that mindset prevails throughout. And I was kind of dipping back into my collegiate experience for that exact reason, where, you know, there were plenty of assessments that no one was sniffing, you know, probably above 80%. And that was by design.
Okay, so the final one that I wanted to talk about was just people don't see value in it, or maybe they're using third-party solutions. And I think throughout this whole conversation, we've hopefully dispelled some of that. I think one of the reasons why people don't see value in it is because it's such a long list. Each one of these things is, you know, maybe 0.5% or less. Everyone wants to make a big impact, right? Like you want to deliver the one solution that covers everything. But understand that even configuring one simple recommended action within that portal makes your organization more secure. I remember talking to my old boss, Doug, and, you know, there were not many things that I did at that org that were like, you know, super impactful, where it was like, oh, I did this one thing. I mean, there were a couple maybe, but you can only have so many of those, right? Like you can't make a big impact every single day. That's just not possible. So what are you doing every day if you're not making a big impact? You're making small little changes, little things, right? And over time, like Adam said, like how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. Like over time, these things will start to make a big impact as you close out more and more recommended actions. But even if you just close out 1 a month, right? 12 a year, I consider that a win, right? And third-party solutions, if you use them, great. Like you can still improve your secure score by resolving it through a third party. There's a section in there. If you're a Microsoft customer, if you're using Exchange, like you will absolutely get value out of this. And I think there are some really great personalities that mesh well with this secure score. For one, if you're new to information security and you have no idea where to go, what a great tool to use, because number one, you get to see all the things that need to be done at your organization. It gives you a list, but also it links you to all the documentation and it links you to the administrative portal so that you can configure it if you need to, right? So go to the documentation, learn why you need to do it, how to configure it, and do some more research. I mean, that's how you learn in information security, is just kind of going down that rabbit hole on this particular configuration. How do I do it? Why should I do it? What are examples of it?
And it's prioritized. Teaches you how to prioritize, teaches you kind of what's important, and you'll learn really quick that it's a lot of identity stuff for sure. Mm-hmm. But just helping plant those seeds in your mind on, here are the most important things you could be doing. Valuable. Another
great use cases for people like veterans or just people who are organized, because it's a checklist, right? Like for me, I'm a results-oriented person. I like seeing things done, right? There's a reason why, when you clean your house, you feel a sense of satisfaction, right? Or if you clean your car, like you accomplish something, you can see the impact. Well, what a great thing to have here, where you complete a single task and you can see that it went up, maybe not a lot, but maybe just 0.5% or 0.7% or something like that. And over time, it'll continue to increase as you close out more and more recommended actions. So people who love checklists, who love to stay organized, this is a great way to get started. So definitely there's value here for security practitioners, new and old, but definitely take a look at it if you haven't, and consider operationalizing this into your security culture.
It's a product that's been around for a while now. And maybe I shouldn't even say a product. It's a feature. It's a capability, because it's not something to buy. It's not sold. It's included. But it's been around for a while. And if you haven't taken a look at it recently, it has certainly evolved and improved over time. So I think back to some of the customer feedback I got early on was, hey, this should track our score over time, because I'm having to manually do that. And what makes a benchmark valuable is seeing that progressive improvement. It now does that. I've had customers say, hey, I need to benchmark this against other organizations that are of like size or like industry. It now does that. And the UI has evolved over time. The detections have evolved over time. There was a period of time when Secure Score didn't pick up if you were enforcing MFA unless you were doing it the old school way and not the recommended way through conditional access. Well, it now does that. So even if this is something you've taken a look at in the past and thought, it's all right, but it's not for me, maybe it's worth a second look as well, because like so many things in the Microsoft universe, there's been that continuous iteration on it now for a half decade. And the product is really, really, there I go, same product again. The feature, the capability has really evolved over time. And it's really good and it's really valuable. And I think every organization can take something away from this. And I would encourage, echoing what Andy said, to find a way to operationalize this. And I would tie that into the other call out I said around operationalizing the message center as well. I think creating some sort of monthly cadence on, here's the changes we're initiating to improve our secure score. Here's the changes coming from Microsoft that we need to prepare to implement, and tying that all together and having some sort of M365 system owner, really valuable.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks as always for watching and listening. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.